All right, well, we're continuing our adventures in the book of Acts with the Apostle Paul. We're in chapter 24 tonight, if you want to find your place there. So, just to kind of a brief recap, Paul wound up his third missionary journey in Jerusalem, where he intended to meet with the church there to provide a love offering for them, to celebrate the festival there. And while he's there, there's a misunderstanding. Some people see him going into the temple. They assume that he is bringing Gentiles into the temple and therefore defiling the temple. He wasn't doing that. It was a complete misunderstanding. People thought they saw something that they really didn't see, which, I mean, we've talked about. It's kind of a lesson to us all that before we spread rumors about something, we need to make sure that what we think we see is what we really see. But they thought they saw something that they didn't see, and so a riot breaks out, and the Roman tribune Claudius Lysias arrests Paul. He claims later in a letter that he did it primarily to protect Paul from the mob, from the crowd, in an attempt to try to find out what this is all about. He asked the Jewish council, the Sanhedrin, to meet and bring the charges against Paul. They basically, it looks a whole lot like Jesus' mock trial that where they make a lot of accusations about things that aren't true. And so and then there's a plot to assassinate Paul that the Roman tribune becomes aware of. And so in an attempt to try to get to the bottom of it, and in an attempt to protect Paul, Claudius Lysias sends Paul to Caesarea Maritime to stand trial before the governor Felix. And that's where we left off last time, with Paul arriving at Caesarea Maritime and meeting with Felix. And Felix says, all right, sit tight, Paul. When your accusers get here, then we'll continue this trial. We'll have this trial at that time. So that's where we are. So we're going to pick up with verse 1 of chapter 24. Now after 5 days, Ananias the high priest came down with the elders and a certain orator named Tertullus. These gave evidence to the governor against Paul. And when he was called upon, Tertullus began his accusation, saying, seeing that through you, now I want you to get how thick he's laying this on here. Seeing that through you we enjoy great peace and prosperity is being brought to this nation by your foresight, we accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. Nevertheless, not to be tedious to you any further, I beg you to hear by your courtesy a few words from us. For we have found this man a plague, a creator of dissension among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, and we seized him and wanted to judge him according to our law. But the commander Lysias came by, and with great violence took him out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come to you. By examining him yourself, you may ascertain all these things of which we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, maintaining that these things were so. All right, let's talk about this a little bit. This takes place in Caesarea Maritime on the coast. I have just a few pictures, if we can get those up. I'll see if I can narrate what we're looking at here. So this is, Caesarea is one of the best maintained archaeological ruins in the Holy Land. And you can see this is part of the city of Caesarea that Paul would have been in. Let's see the next picture. Okay, this is the harbor, and this is roughly where the palace would have been. So this is the area of Caesarea that he would have probably been in and been tried in, and also where later on when he appears before Agrippa, it would have been here in this where the palace would have been. This is the kind of the theater, not really a theater, more like a stadium kind of thing there. You can kind of see the track where the horses or chariots or whatever would have raced. This is the bathhouse, the Roman bathhouse, and it's very well preserved as well. Like I said, some of the best preserved ruins in the Holy Land are here in Caesarea. Oh yeah, there's some hardy adventurers ready to head to Caesarea and help Paul in his time of need there. So anyway, but Caesarea, if you get the opportunity to go to the Holy Land, Caesarea is definitely one of the places you want to see. All right, so let's talk about these verses here. Tertullus, who is the orator. So the high priest and the Jews that are coming to accuse Paul, they bring their own lawyer, if you will, professional spokesperson, and it's Tertullus, and he's laying it on thick, and he begins to exaggerate what took place and falsify the claims and the testimony as he testifies before Felix. What's some of the ways that he does this? Do what? Yeah, he says he's a plague. So he starts off even the way he starts off. See, verse 2, seeing that through you we enjoy great peace and prosperity. They weren't enjoying peace and prosperity. And then he calls Paul a plague. He says that Paul has profaned the temple, which is not true. That's what this whole misunderstanding was about. And notice what he says, that we wanted to try him ourselves, but Claudius Lysias came and with great violence took him from us and sent him to you. Well, it was kind of the shoe on the other foot. They were the ones that were being violent, at least according to what Claudius Lysias says. They were the mob was the one that was threatening violence, and in order to protect Paul, that Claudius Lysias rescued him and sent him on to Felix. Now, what these Jews may not have known is that Claudius Lysias had sent a letter to Felix himself and had explained the situation. And so Tertullus could be doing himself more harm than good here. But if you kind of weed through all of this political speak that Tertullus is making, he makes basically three charges against Paul. The first is, like was said, he's a plague. Now, what does he mean by that? He's a troublemaker. So why would that catch the attention of the Roman governor? Stirring up the peace, exactly, right. So, if you're talking about, if you start making accusations of someone being a troublemaker, now you're talking about charges like sedition or insurrection. So they're trying to frame charges that Rome would care about. Because if they say, well, he defiled our temple, Rome doesn't care. He's not keeping the Jewish laws, Rome doesn't care. But if you say he's a troublemaker and instigating riots, now Rome cares, you see. They had to do the same thing with Jesus. They had to they had to make it something that Rome cared about. So it was not until they could hang the charge on him that he he claims to be a king, and he encourages us to not pay taxes to Caesar, which also was not true of Jesus. Then they had something on Jesus. So they're trying to frame something, a charge against Paul that Rome would care about. Then they say something about him being the ringleader of the Nazarene sect. Now, what's the Nazarene sect? Who's the Nazarene? Jesus. Yeah, so what they're saying is that he is the ringleader of this sect that follows Jesus Christ. Well, he was, but it wasn't a sect. It was the true. And Paul would say this: I follow Jesus Christ, who is the fulfillment of the Jewish religion. And then finally, they make the accusation that he violated the temple, which to them was a huge deal. Now, it was a big deal for them to make this claim that he was the ringleader, that he was a troublemaker, and he was a ringleader of the Nazarene sect, because now that ties a troublemaker to the Nazarene sect, or the church is how we would say it. What would it mean to the Christian community if the Nazarene sect were found to be troublemakers? Yeah. What did you say, Corey? Greater persecution. In other words, Rome. So at this time, it's not against the law to be a Christian in the Roman Empire. At this time, it later would be. But what it would mean is if they could somehow tie charges like these people are troublemakers, they're anti-Rome, to the Christian movement, then Rome could come in and outlaw Christianity, which they ultimately do. But at this time, it was not against the law to be a Christian in the Roman Empire. Questions on those verses? All right, let's look on then to verse 10. Then Paul, after the governor had nodded to him to speak, answered. Now here's Paul's defense. Inasmuch as I know you have been for many years a judge of this nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself, because you may ascertain that it was no more than 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem to worship. They neither found me in the temple disputing with anyone, nor inciting the crowd, either in the synagogues or in the city, nor can they prove the things of which they accuse me. But this I confess to you, that according to the way which they call a sect, so I worship the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets. I have hope in God, which they themselves also accept, that there will be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and the unjust. This being so, I myself always strive to have a conscience without offense toward God and men. Now, after many years, I came to bring alms and offerings to my nation, in the midst of which some Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with a mob nor with a tumult. They ought to have been here before you to object if they had anything against me, or else let those who are here themselves say if they found any wrongdoing in me while I stood before the council, unless it is for this one statement which I cried out, standing among them, concerning the resurrection of the dead, I am being judged by you this day. All right, so Paul proves himself to be a bit of an orator himself, doesn't he? So they had made 3 charges against Paul: that he's a plague, he's a troublemaker, that he's the ringleader of the Nazarene sect, and that he violated the temple. So how does he respond to this? He starts by the accusation that he was a troublemaker. And what does he say? I have no history of insurrection. You've been a judge of this nation for a long time. You know, I haven't appeared before you before. I've not have a history of making trouble. He says, I've only been in Jerusalem 12 days. In other words, I couldn't have caused all that much trouble. I couldn't possibly have caused all the trouble they say I've caused. I've only been in town 12 days. And he said, I've only come to worship. I haven't come to cause trouble. I just came to worship. In regard to the fact that he was the ringleader of the Nazarene sect, what does he say? He said, they call it a sect, but I call it the way. Probably, you know, before Christians were called Christians, they referred to themselves as the way, probably playing off of Jesus' statement, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So when he talks about the way, he's talking about Christianity here. Yes. So a sect is a branch of an offshoot of a religion. Let me see. So the Pharisees were a sect of Judaism. The Sadducees were a sect of Judaism. That sort of thing. In other words, a little branch of that. I'm trying to see if I can do some contemporary. Yeah, but I'm not sure that that's completely sort of, but like. Well, I started to say that, and I would say, gosh, and this is not trying to make an offense to anybody, but I would say like the Seventh-day Adventist Church is a sect of Christianity. All right? In other words, they are Christians, but they're an offshoot. They're not mainstream Christianity, if that makes sense. Then they tend to think they have the truth, that kind of thing. So to say what the accusation was that Paul is in an offshoot of Judaism. Paul said, I'm not in an offshoot of Judaism. I'm in the fulfillment of the Jewish. I'm in the fulfillment of the Jewish religion. All right. And he says, I don't know, and I love this. He says, I don't know why they're so upset unless it's this one thing that I'm here on trial for the resurrection of the dead. And he says, I believe I have hope in God, 15, which they themselves also accept. In other words, we agree on this, that there will be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and the unjust. Paul's saying, I don't know why they're so upset. I mean, I believe the same thing they do. I just believe it's fulfilled in Jesus. And he says, finally, they accuse him of violating the temple, and he says, I didn't violate the temple. And if someone saw me do this, why aren't they here to testify? And if these people here that are making these accusations, if they saw me do something, why don't they get up here and testify? So technically, he's got a point here. If you're accusing someone of a crime and you have no witnesses, you pretty much have no case. I mean that's, if you're bringing someone to trial and the prosecutor says, now, we heard tell that, Brother Mark robbed a bank. Okay, where's your evidence? Well, we don't have any of that. Well, where's your witnesses? Well, we don't have any, but we heard somebody back, in Texas said that they thought he robbed a bank. Guess what? I'm getting off scot-free. No witnesses. So Paul here points to the fact that because there's no witnesses, there should be no case. But he's able to present his case in such a way that he also is able to work the gospel in. Did you see how he did that? How does he do that? Exactly. He points out that the contention is over the resurrection of the dead through Jesus, because basically he said, I believe the same things they do, but the only thing I can figure out that they're mad at me about is I've claimed that Jesus rose from the dead. And so he has an opportunity, even in this trial, to share the gospel, even when he's giving his defense at trial. Questions on those verses? Okay, let's look on then to verse 22. When Felix heard these things, having more accurate knowledge of the way, he adjourned the proceedings and said, when Lysias the commander comes down, I will make a decision on your case. So he commanded the centurion to keep Paul and to let him have liberty, and told him not to forbid any of his friends to provide for or visit him. In other words, he could have visitors, and it was kind of house arrest sort of deal. 24, and after some days, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, he sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. Now, as he reasoned about righteousness and self-control and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid. And he answered, go away for now, and when I have a convenient time, I will call for you. Meanwhile, he also hoped that money would be given him by Paul that he might release him. Therefore, he sent for him more often and conversed with him. But after 2 years, Porcius Festus succeeded Felix, and Felix, wanting to do the Jews a favor, left Paul bound. So basically, Felix keeps him 2 years, visits him ever so often, listens to what he has to say. Yeah, he's hoping to get some money out of the deal, and then leaves him. Still, we find when Felix is succeeded by Festus. I love these names. I mean, Gunsmoke has forever ruined these names for me. But anyway, we find when Felix is no longer governor, Paul's still in prison. And so he becomes now Festus's problem to deal with. So why did Felix put off making a decision on Paul's case? Yeah, well, he couldn't. I mean, he was afraid of to turn him loose, very much like Pilate with Jesus. He was afraid to turn him loose, but he was also really knew that Paul probably was innocent of the things he was being charged. So he believed him innocent, but he didn't want to risk offending the Jews. Also, he thought Paul might give him some money. If I keep this guy in here long enough, maybe Paul will, if he really is the leader of this, of this religious sect, maybe he will, give me some money, or maybe they'll take up a love offering to, post bond for him or something. And it seems as though he really enjoyed listening to Paul. It says that he had some knowledge of the way. In other words, he wasn't coming at it, flat-footed. He knew something of the way of Christ. But it says that when he heard Paul talking about the judgment about self, where am I? 25, as he reasoned about righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid. Why was he afraid, do you think? I think he was under conviction, don't you? And so he did what a lot of people do that are under conviction. What does he say? Go away for now, and I'll call for you at a convenient time. You ever witnessed to someone and they said that? Yeah, let me, go away for now, and at a convenient time, we'll talk again. I think that's one of Satan's favorite phrases, is let's put it off. Why make a decision for Christ today when you can put it off till tomorrow? And Satan knows that if he can get you to put it off for enough tomorrows, then your tomorrows will run out. One day your Sundays will run out. I've got a sermon that I preach for that. There's no record that he ever came to Christ. He certainly knew. He heard the gospel apparently multiple times. He knew about Christ, but we're never told that he knew Christ. Very simple. Do what? No, he wasn't a Jew. His wife was a Jew. It is. Was it him or was it his wife was Jewish? Yeah. So what do you see as stumbling blocks in Felix's life that may have prevented him from accepting Christ? Pride. I saw you say pride. Yeah. What else? Yes, his position. Pride, political position, political ambition. What else do you see, Mike? Money, greed. Are those some things that sometimes prevent people from coming to Christ today? I mean, they are still stumbling blocks for people today, it seems. Yeah, he was wanting a bribe. I mean, that's clearly what he was wanting. Well, I don't know if it would make him feel less guilty, but I think it would. He thinks that money would buy a lot of salve to ease his guilt. I think is probably the idea there. Right. Yeah. He was hoping that Paul would take the hint, I think, but Paul did not. So Paul seems to say that, there's really the only difference in what I believe and what the Jews believe, it's all anchored in this one event that I believe and confess and they deny, and that is what? The resurrection. He says it all boils down to this. They claim to believe in a resurrection. I claim that it happened through Jesus Christ. So what do you think this has to say about where our focus should be when we're witnessing, when we're teaching, when we're preaching? Where should our focus be? On the resurrection. If that is what distinguishes us from everybody else, then our focus should squarely be on the cross and the empty tomb. A crucified and risen Jesus. And if we ever start to get too far off of that, then we really lose the power. We really begin to look like everybody else. And we only have power if we're something different. You can't be salt and light to the world when you look just like the world. Your message will never be convicting to the world if you're saying the same thing that the world is. So we have to maintain that difference, because that is what separates us. That is what brings the conviction. That is what brings salvation. It's what distinguishes us from everybody else in the world. That we maintain that Jesus Christ, God's Son, was crucified, buried, and rose again. And no other religious leader in the history of the world can claim that. All right. What comments, questions do you have on Acts chapter 24? multiple times. Yeah, exactly. Felix certainly would have heard the gospel, not just once, but multiple times. We have a brief video.